So, once every few years, the UK grooming gangs come up. Now, I've known about this for maybe like 7 years now. There's no need to go into a bunch of detail about it because there's videos all over YouTube about it. It is no secret. And so whenever it comes up, the British government's like, well, you know, we did cover it up. Yeah, that was rough. Anyways, don't be Islamophobic. It's essentially the entire argument every time. But let's just see how this is discussed publicly. And Piers Morgan is usually pretty fair and balanced, but when it comes to this topic, this is essentially state-run media where he's going to say, yeah, you know, that was really bad what happened and that shouldn't have happened and it's absolutely heinous. It's terrible. I know that's a Kiwi accent. What are you gonna do? But he still has to cover for the government and push this to Islamophobia and what about white people. For those of you that don't know, you're about to hear about some pretty egregious sexual assault crimes to children. Put on your helmets. Things are about to get pretty tarded.
Well, the UK's rape grooming scandal, let's call it a rape scandal.
Fair enough.
Not really about even grooming. It's just about people raping young, often underage girls. Is a grotesque stain on Britain's standing as a world leader in morality and the rule of law.
I'd say so.
There's no nuance and no complexity to this. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands
it's a bit much.
of child victims of sexual abuse were denied justice and denied shelter from a state whose primary role it is to protect them, simply in order to avoid, in many cases, stirring racial tensions.
Okay, so according to Piers Morgan, there was a government cover-up of British Pakistani men sexually assaulting teenage white girls. Interesting. Has it been happening for a long time?
Authorities knew exactly what was happening, but they turned a blind eye to the prolonged grooming and rape of largely white children by gangs of mostly Pakistani heritage men. We know this because some journalists and some public figures working with brave whistleblowers and victims were refusing to be silenced.
Silenced?
The Times newspaper broke the story first back in January 2011 with that dramatic front page. I interviewed one of the original victims and whistleblowers as the host of Good Morning Britain back in 2018. He was a serial rapist. You weren't his only victim by a long way. He was the ringleader of this infamous child grooming gang in Rotherham, right? I didn't even know that anybody, any rapist, could ever get access to any child born from their appalling actions.
Let alone be invited.
But he was jailed for 35 years, right, for multiple sex offences against 9 Rotherham girls, including you. This isn't just somebody who committed one rape against one person. This is a serial groomer and rapist, the worst type of human being imaginable, preying on young girls as you were, right?
Yeah.
What I mean, this clearly has been... This won't be the only time this has happened, presumably. What should be done to the law to stop this nonsense?
Well, I'm asking for a change in law for the Children's Act 1989 to ensure that no rapist can apply for access to a child conceived through abuse and rape.
Racism.
Sammy Woodhouse gave birth to a son at the age of 15 after she was raped. The man who attacked her has now been told he can apply to the courts to be part of the child's life.
The fact that a man that's in prison for raping me, you know, lots of other children, and is a direct risk to my son, could have actually been the one raising him from a cell. You know, that's my worst nightmare.
Arshid Hussain was the ringleader behind the grooming and sexual abuse of more than 50 young girls in Rotherham. He was jailed for 35 years for 23 child sex offences. Sammy is calling for a change in the law to stop child sex offenders having any parental rights over children who are conceived as a result of rape.
And all I hear is, well, actually, he's got human rights. Well, what about our human rights? Why are we constantly blamed, ignored, failed, time and time again? This has been happening for decades. It's not just social workers involved in this, it's the entire system.
You know, I feel like we're couching our language here to a pretty extreme degree when it's the system, and it seems like it's because she's white, that they didn't care about it and they swept it under the rug. That seems to fit, I would say, systemic oppression. That's a pretty oppressive thing that happened there, that she had to go through. And to show her face and be an advocate about it, That's what it takes, apparently, to not be cared if you're called a racist when it comes to this topic.
So the point is, the scandal was covered by mainstream media, both television and newspapers. Not enough, in my opinion, as a journalist. But it doesn't mean also that it wasn't a massive cover-up. It was covered up by almost everyone involved in this. We know that a documentary on the grooming gangs was postponed to avoid aiding the right-wing BNP in local elections.
Oh my god, so it was also politically motivated because that would embolden the right wing if they were honest? This is getting pretty egregious.
We know a senior police officer in Rotherham, where many of these atrocious crimes took place, told a victim's father the town would erupt if the details came out.
Imagine if a senior police officer said to you, in response to, if you're a father, no. If you're a dad, and that happened to your daughter, and the senior police officer in response said to you, but what would people think? Oh, I think the meter would be rising. Oh, what that would do to so many dads. Hearing that, they say an armed society is a polite society, and I know the UK isn't very armed, and that doesn't sound very polite at all, does it?
Authorities had a crystal clear picture of a small section of the community that was ultimately responsible for the vast majority of the most wicked crimes. They were, in the main, British, Pakistani Muslims, almost exclusively. The politicians, law enforcement, local authorities conspired to bury the truth because they were afraid, in many cases, of being labelled racist if they told the truth.
If white nationalism was a recipe, I would say the government covering up the extreme abuse your daughter went through because of her race and the image they're trying to project to the country would be the main ingredient.
And the reason it's become a global story now is because Elon has snapped many people from their inertia on this by amplifying so many horrific details that people may otherwise not have known. And that's where Tommy Robinson comes in. People may or may not know my views on Tommy Robinson. I think he has a long, very ugly record of brazen race baiting. In my opinion, a very open and transparent hatred of all things to do with Islam and consequentially most Muslims.
So this is actually rape culture, where these are racially motivated rapes, and you're being called out as a race baiter if you bring attention to it, even though we already admitted that the government covered it up to not look racist. He's a race baiter. Piers, this is the first time you're really letting me down. I think we would need more than a baseless, hollow, defamatory accusation like that. You would probably want to substantiate that.
There's no doubt that, to be fair to Robinson, he has banged the drum about the rape gang scandal for a very long time, and he should be credited for doing that. In fact, he was on Newsnight on the BBC just a month after the Times broke the story with Jeremy Paxman and said this.
Do you know anyone that's hooked on heroin sold to them by Muslim gangs? You probably don't. I do. Do you know any beautiful girls that you went to school with that are now wearing a burqa that don't see their family? Probably don't. I do. Do you know anyone who's been murdered by a Muslim gang? You probably don't. I do. Do you know any 15-year-old girls that you know that you've grown up with that have been raped or pimped? You don't. So I don't expect you to understand the issues.
These are all personal issues of yours.
Personal issues in towns and cities like mine that are happening, and they're not happening with the Sikh community, they're not happening with the Jewish community.
And indeed, they're not happening with most Muslims.
Piers, why would you call him a race baiter and then show him saying it's not the Sikh community, which they're from northern India, it's not the Jews? He's specifically differentiating that it's not these other groups. He's not blaming the Sikhs, who are brown, quote-unquote brown. It's not the Jews. He's specifically talking about the demographic that he's talking about. So how are you going to say he's race baiting when he differentiates between different groups to specifically talk about the group he's trying to focus on?
They're not happening with most Muslims.
No, they're happening within the Islamic community. This is what I'm saying, that it's an Islamic problem.
Well, joining me to discuss all this is a psychologist, author of We Who Wrestle with God, the co-founder of the Peterson Academy, my good friend Jordan Peterson. Jordan, great to have you back on Uncensored. You contacted me because you don't agree necessarily with my views of Tommy Robinson. I think we share a lot of views, probably even with him. about the rape gang scandal. There's much to discuss here. First of all, the rape gang scandal itself.
Oh, a scandal. We have a bit of a scandal on our hands, do we? Now, we speak English. We speak the King's English. As far as I know, scandal usually refers to an incident and not generational grooming and government cover-up of extreme abuse to the daughters of your countrymen based on their race. I'd say it's a bit more than a scandal, old boy. Oh, it's a little more than scandalous.
This is a scandal that hasn't gone away, that the cover-up has never been properly investigated, that people were never held properly accountable, that no one has gone to prison who was at any level of responsibility for trying to protect these girls. None of them were properly held to account. All of that, I think, is a valuable thing that Elon Musk has now made everyone think about properly. And the only answer to me is a full independent national inquiry to get to the bottom of all of it and then to hold people properly accountable.
But Piers has to call out Tommy Robinson for anything bad he's ever done to try to discredit him. Let's see, in Piers' long list of transgressions by Tommy Robinson, if any of them are even close to worse than what you've heard he's trying to fight against.
They just don't seem to understand that Robinson's criminal record is highly extensive and very unpleasant.
Unpleasant.
For 20 years, he's been breaking the law. He attacked an off-duty police officer. He led a hooligan group of football thugs in a brawl involving 100 people. He headbutted a man in Blackburn. He used a false passport to get round the fact he had criminal convictions in the UK to get into America and was caught.
I can't believe it.
He perpetrated mortgage fraud, over £160,000. He was then found in contempt of court twice for turning up at court cases involving people who had been accused of committing these heinous crimes of grooming and raping these girls, nearly wrecking the trials because he was saying defamatory things in public outside the courtroom.
Piers, how do you on one hand wholeheartedly acknowledge that your government covered this up and someone's trying to call it out and you're like, yeah, but he headbutted someone. Okay, I'd be headbutting people too if this was happening in my country. Mortgage fraud. Do you think, Piers, that your government was possibly targeting him because he was speaking out about the thing they were trying to cover up? Old boy, Piers, you're a smart boy. Come on, Piers, you're more clever than this.
And he was found guilty of stalking a journalist and accusing her partner of being a paedophile. This is not a nice guy. This is a pretty repellent human being who also simultaneously has been right to bang on for many years about the scandal of the rape gangs.
That's nice, Piers. You dilapidated hog's carcass of a vagina. Let's let Jordan Peterson cook right now. We're gonna let him cook for a little bit, but he adds a lot of context to this in a way that I cannot do.
Yeah, well, I've been following the rape gang scandal for, I would say, 15 years, but the primary source of information for me in Canada has been Tommy Robinson, and his insistence on pursuing this come what may was part of the reason that I looked into it. And I think that's probably the case for Elon Musk as well. And it's an open question how much of a monster you have to be to shrug off all the accusations and the reputation savaging and to put and the threats to your own existence and to your family's existence to sally forth regardless and bring these issues to public attention, over a decade, let's say. And, it might be wonderful for us to presume that the person who does that would also be of unimpeachable ethical character on all dimensions simultaneously. But we've seen the silence of people with unimpeachable characters in the face of this onslaught, and it doesn't bode well for them. So, and then the other thing I would say too, this isn't exactly in defense of Robinson. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to weave my way through this. But, there's another ugly issue here, Piers, that no one will grapple with, which is, you described Robinson as anti-Muslim, let's say. Well, we don't really understand the relationship between the religious doctrine, let's say, and the fact of these crimes. Now, I want to make two cases here. The first case is that 40 out of 50 Muslim majority countries in the world are authoritarian hellholes, and only 3 of them are democracies. And that's Morocco, Indonesia, and Turkey.
Islamic countries are among the most oppressive countries in the entire world. They have apostasy laws, where they can kill you for leaving the religion, in I believe 8 countries, and blasphemy laws, where they punish you for leaving the religion but not kill you. And even in countries where it's not supremely authoritarian, they still, regardless of what's in their charter for their country, revert back to sharia law to settle disputes. And whenever Jordan Peterson says, nobody wants to talk about this, he means nobody on the left wants to talk about this. Anyone not on the left has no problem talking about this.
And, they're not, I wouldn't put them in the highest echelons of stellar states. And so why is that exactly? Is that a deviation from Islamic principles, or is it a consequence of them? Now, no one wants to have that discussion, and it's no bloody wonder, and then, so that's on the negative side, let's say. And there are certainly doctrines in Islam that are very, very difficult to square with free, liberal, Western, Christian democracies. And those differences aren't just apparent, they're deep. Now, I would say on the optimistic side that we could turn to Islamic leaders like those who run the United Arab Emirates, and even to some degree now Saudi Arabia, and the signatories of the Abraham Accords, to find a different pathway. There have been stellar leaders, both from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who've come out and said that publicly, very publicly, that they've got their Islamic fundamentalists under control and firmly in hand, and are completely undiluted as to their danger. But Europeans are virtue signaling so hard on the progressive side that the fundamental danger from Islamic fundamentalism is going to come from Europe and the UK and not from the Arab states. Now, Tommy Robinson has been pilloried as anti-Islam, but there's a discussion to be had here. And no one wants to have it. And, you said we need a national inquiry. It's like, we need more than a national inquiry. We need something like an international symposium on the relationship between the Christian West and the Islamic world, because there are ugly things afoot, and they've manifested themselves in the most hideous of all possible ways in the UK with regards to these rape crimes and the cover-up.
Can we agree in terms of civil discourse on such an egregious topic that Jordan Peterson is the Jordan of having this conversation right now? Because you have to have it very carefully. You have to preface things and have consideration, but still get your message through. And so far, I would say Jordan Peterson should have his own shoe for how well he's portraying this, for something that's been covered up for decades.
But there's something that needs to be sorted out at the bottom of all this. And one of those is, like, you talk about moderate Muslims. Like, I looked up the polling data today that Winston Marshall, for example, referred to when he interviewed Nigel Farage. And, it's about 3/4 of UK Muslims would be perfectly content if Sharia law happened to be the principle of the day for the UK as a whole. And that it would be fine if Islam became the national religion. Now, that's 75%. So, a cynic would say, okay, just exactly where the hell are these moderates? And at minimum, their voice needs to be amplified. And then we could also point out that the participation in these rapes by members of the Pakistani Muslim community, it was like 1 in 7 of the men in some of these communities was directly involved.
In certain crimes in the United States, we complain about 13% of the population committing 50% of a certain crime. Imagine if 1 in 7 of the people was committing a somewhat more dubious crime. Imagine how you might feel then.
And that meant everyone knew about it. Absolutely everyone on the Pakistani Muslim side. And the moderates were certainly, silent and complicit. Now, obviously, so were the authorities. And so that's a complete bloody catastrophe for everyone involved. But there's a serious conversation to be had in the West, and particularly in the UK, maybe France and Germany in secondary place, about just exactly how it is that liberal Western democracies, with their emphasis on the rights of women, can live side by side with Islam in general, especially the sort of Islam that's transformed into enabling fundamentalism that allows this sort of criminality on the part of the resentful psychopathic sadists.
So here's
no one
what
wants to have that conversation.
Well, listen, I think any conversation is worth having, no question.
Now, Jordan Peterson was allowed to cook for quite a while, but I love it when Jordan Peterson says these psychopathic, sadistic psychopaths, and Piers Morgan has to go, oh god, I still live here, we have to cover it up, we have to ignore it, we have to address it, we have to ignore it. Yeah, I also want to talk about that. No, you don't, Piers. You clearly don't. This is the equivalent of state-run media right now in a liberal Western democracy, and it's pathetic.
The UK has always come out pretty much on top of all the surveys of tolerance and diversity and a good, safe, pretty good place to live. We had a big problem with ISIS extremists a few years ago, but we managed to tackle that. And thanks to Donald Trump and others in America, ISIS, until recently, has been kept very firmly back in its box and not been able to commit the same outrages.
Piers is talking like he's sitting on a dildo right now. We kept back the Islamic attacks, until recently, to keep back the Islamic outrages. Oh my god, the couching of language around Islam should be concerning. That such an egregious crime can happen, and this is how it's being discussed. Do we remember how the George Floyd case was handled around the world? Was it used with such delicate language?
Let's take it apart a little bit more then. I mean, first of all, there are reasons that the authorities were afraid to act in the manner that they should have. Now, they were afraid partly because they would be pilloried by their confreres on the radical left, because the progressives are very good at reputation savaging their own.
Yeah.
But they're also afraid of Islamic fundamentalist backlash and the murderousness that might accompany that. So there's a reason they're afraid. And Piers, you also didn't address my issue, and I'm not accusing you of anything. I don't expect you to have the answers because this is too complex. But, the fact that only 3 of 50 Muslim majority polities in the world, states, are democratic, even approximating democratic, it's like, what the hell are we to make of that exactly? Like, look, first of all...
I love how Jordan Peterson leaks out way too much truth all at once. He's like, what the hell are we supposed to do with these people? He goes, wait, hold on, I didn't mean it that way. But let's transition into the final act of this horrific play we call reality, and bring in some fresh blood.
To watch you guys, spiral yourselves into the ground for these, for this idiot, weak political correctness that's gone so far that you can allow your working class women to be raped en masse sadistically and say nothing about it, and gaslight people who are telling the truth. It's so sickening. It's so demoralizing. It's almost unspeakable. We all pray, hope and pray here in Canada and the US that you get your act together and grow some spine again and put your damn country back together and stand up to these bloody psychopathic bullies and the woke green mob, because it would be a dreadful shame to lose you.
Right?
Well, you're not going to lose us, Jordan. There are enough of us here who still think it's a great country. We're joined now to debate that interview with Jordan Peterson, political commentator Ava Santina, uncensored contributor Esther Krakow, and the public philosopher and writer Jack Symes, and the co-host of Steve Bannon's War Room, Natalie Winters, over in the States. So welcome to all of you. Now, Jack, you've been very immersed in this subject. You went on Joe Rogan. You were personally abused by Tommy Robinson after that.
Piers, my dude, do you really think it's appropriate, given the current subject matter, to position whatever Tommy Robinson did to this man as personal abuse? He personally abused him? Chill, dude. Bring it down a notch.
Did you change any of your view about Jordan's role in this, having heard him tonight, or not?
I think not. I think he's not prepared to say anything negative about Tommy Robinson. I think that's very telling.
Well, he was almost saying it's not relevant to the whistleblowing about the rape gang scandal.
Now we're going to witness the heartless psychopathy of the left, of leftists, where Piers Morgan is going to try to explain to the leftist how we shouldn't be focusing on Tommy Robinson as a person when his advocacy for the last decade has been about the grooming gangs targeting young white girls by British Pakistani men. That's really what the focus should be. Listen to this psychopath shift the conversation away from the victims and more toward the target of Tommy Robinson.
I kind of get that argument, is that you can have a view about the reason he's in prison, which has nothing to do with that. You can have a view about his criminal past, being a football hooligan, beating up a policeman, mortgage fraud, passport stuff, all that stuff. You can have all these views about him, but you can also perhaps separate that from his relentless campaigning about what has turned out to be a scandal on the scale he kept saying it was.
But Jordan's not prepared to tackle Tommy's Islamophobia. It's
Psychopath.
He's done things in the past that are bad, and they're
You're a
unconnected
psychopath.
to his anti-Islamic agenda. The reason Tommy was upset with me and started this little hate campaign of his against me was
narcissist
because
too.
I just quoted what he was saying on Twitter. I'll give the quote again because I paraphrased it last time. To be crystal clear, Tommy Robinson wrote at the end of last year, "Palestine is a shithole full of inbred Islamist parasites and terrorists."
Well, it looks like I'm gonna have to send him a Christmas card.
Jordan's responsible for this mess that's going on now. And I don't say that lightly because I've spoken to Jordan for hours. And in terms of philosophy of religion, we get along well, we have good conversations. But I think he should be ashamed of himself because in the UK, we know who Tommy Robinson is. In the US, he has been Tommy Robinson's passport to gaining influence with Elon Musk, gaining influence with all of Peterson's followers. Last year, Peterson's videos online, they amassed over 9 million views on his output on Tommy Robinson. 3 hours of conversation. None of that dangerous rhetoric comes up at all. This is a former Harvard researcher. This is someone who worked at the University of Toronto. This is someone who claims to have had a keen interest in Tommy Robinson for years. Why was no question asked about that?
Well, if you're not an insane psychopath, you would probably understand that Jordan Peterson has been following this for like 15 years, and Tommy Robinson was speaking out about it, and he was being silenced, as many people were in the country, as has been previously revealed on the show that I assumed you just watched like we all did. Why didn't you ask Jordan Peterson why he's so interested in Tommy Robinson? Well, that would be an autistically psychopathic thing to ask, because of the over-the-top, civil war starting crimes that have been happening for a couple generations now in the country. How do you hear what's been happening to these girls and go, yeah, but why does Jordan Peterson care so much? You would have to have no empathy as a human being to keep steering the conversation toward Tommy Robinson to the point where you're like, yeah, I get it. They were like horrifically abused, and I know. Anyway, why didn't you ask him more about why he's so interested in what Tommy Robinson is saying? That's a psychopath. How do you explain how you're supposed to be disgusted by what Tommy Robinson is advocating against and trying to draw attention to? How do you explain those emotions to a psychopath? I'm sorry, how do you explain those emotions to the left? But women who are not on the left are seemingly always more reasonable than men who are on the left. So let's let this bitch absolutely cook and succinctly reiterate overwhelmingly true and undeniable points.
Why should we blame multiculturalism in totality for this?
Sure, well, I don't really think that tolerance should be the paramount virtue if the disparate cultures that you're importing into said country are cultures that, frankly, I think are conducive to gang raping of young girls. If you read the Quran, I mean, young women, pedophilia isn't something that's totally out of the blue. It's codified in that text. And I think why it resonates so strongly in America, and I know your analysis of it was maybe a little bit reductive, but it's because that's the lived experience of a lot of Americans when it comes to the issue of immigration. And I think the hypocrisy where you see elites pushing multiculturalism, pushing open borders, mass migration, when they've never really made the case as to why the average American benefits from it or needs to have it. They just say diversity is our strength, and that's where they end the sentence. And I think to that point, right, when you read the limited inquiries that they've had into the whole grooming gang escapades, what do they always say? Oh, well, the police didn't go into it because they didn't want to start race riots or race wars. I'm sorry. These are the same elites who have absolutely no qualms or no issue with bringing up, racialized incidents if it's a white person being the aggressor against a minority. Just look at what happened in the case of George Floyd. So it's very selective, and I think it confirms what a lot of people think here, certainly in the United States, with the agenda of certainly mass illegal, and I think we've also learned this week, legal immigration, that there is some level of replacement, I think, of American culture going on here, and they do it by importing cultures that have nothing in common with the West. And our leaders will say that assimilation is racist, it's neo-colonial, it's not appropriate to say that cultures that have different values and standards than us need to adopt the shared cultures of the country that they're immigrating to. So that is not an approach to immigration that works.
Okay, but isn't it undeniably true that I think the vast majority of domestic terrorism in the United States this century has been perpetrated by white people?
Oh, okay, Piers. Well, the white people are a majority population, but despite being 13% of the population, over 50% of violent crime is by black people. That's worse than the point that you're making. Don't look up the AIDS statistics. The findings may appear to be uncouth.
It is
well,
correct.
I think if you want to have the uncomfortable conversation about Islam, it is sort of conducive to pedophilia. I mean, I don't necessarily...
Listen to how fucking triggered the soy Brits get when you start attacking Islam. Here we go.
Pakistani, British men.
Ask her again about the white school shooters.
Where
she didn't
I read
answer
the Quran.
answer that question.
It's nice to have a conspiracy theorist on the line. It's always good fun. I hate to pull rank at you and sound like a twat, but
not a
both of my PhDs
theory,
are in
it's
philosophy
called
of
the
religion,
Quran.
and I think I'm slightly more qualified to speak about the Quran than you are, and to suggest even for a moment that that document allows for, what it does is condemn non-consensual marriage and non-consensual sexual contact.
Well, I'd look up the rates of child brides then, and I'd see
the
what
real
countries
risk you
they're
have in
most
the US
prevalent in.
isn't multiculturalism. It's a multi-billionaire running the biggest social media planet, one of the biggest in the world, which has turned into an echo chamber of your ridiculous ideology. And the fact that you're sat here telling us all and telling the British public, who we're proudly multicultural, and as someone that was brought up in multicultural working class Birmingham, I can tell you for sure that there's not you won't find a Muslim there who's read the Quran and went, oh, you know what, it didn't rule out sexual violence, so I might just crack on with that. I don't know what planet you're living on or what you're smoking, but I'd suggest that you do a course in religious studies before you start chatting.
Well, thank you for the ad hominem attacks. I'm sure that means you have a really strong argument, but I think the young working class girls who probably grew up in the same areas that you did would beg to differ. I don't understand what you're saying. I've read the Quran. I've seen what's in there. Even if you don't think that my interpretation of the Quran is correct, I would point you to, I don't know, what countries have the most issues when it comes to child brides and raping of young girls and children. It's obviously a systemic cultural problem with Islam. It's not a problem that is contained or unique to the West. And I don't know, last time I checked, this whole grooming gang phenomenon is what contained primarily to Muslim men, and it really only started when you started seeing mass migration waves.
I just think this is so dangerous. This is so dangerous what you're saying.
Are you starting to get it yet? Are you starting to get how the only point of racism is mind control and to control people? Even to their own detriment of their own countrymen and women and daughters and sons and everyone? This is really dangerous that you're making it seem like it's all Muslims. That's dangerous. Anyways, we need to deconstruct whiteness. No. We don't mean white people. We just mean whiteness as a construct. These people are demons. The entire conversation should have been about the victims. It never is. It always goes to defending Muslims. Sorry, you're incompatible with the West. In general, in the aggregate. Look at the Muslim majority countries. Which one do you want to go to? Think about it. Research it. Look it up. Tell me which one you want to go to. One of the 3 secular ones, which still have Sharia law in the countries? Okay, I'm about to pop a blood vessel, so let's start to wrap this up.
I'm sorry, if these were black British girls and black communities had found out that their girls were being sadistically raped in this way, there is not a soul in the country that could call any of them racist for wanting justice.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, this boils down to the fact that we're not honest about multiculturalism in this country. And to say that, oh, it's because, nobody wanted to offend the Muslims. No, it's also because the victims were white and working class and nobody cared.
Yeah, okay.
The people that have threatened Jess Phillips have been arrested within 48 hours. There have been thousands of victims of these rape gangs in this country that have not even seen their attacker go to prison. So that's a big point.
But why aren't we talking about the police? Why aren't we talking about the police who, in that report, were shown to have repeatedly failed to to believe that they were credible witnesses?
Some of them were tipping off their attackers.
Yes, but what on earth? Why haven't
the police
we had
got
a
into
conversation
victim
about
blaming? They were accusing the girls of being drunk and leading these guys on. I mean, at every level, there was a systemic failure of these girls.
Oh, okay. A black adult not being able to get a loan because of their shitty credit, that's systemic oppression. But what's been happening to these girls for over a generation is a systemic failure. It's not systemic oppression. It's a systemic failure. It's like they're trying to create white nationalists. It's incredible. We've admitted they were targeted because they were white. They weren't listened to because they were white. This information has been out for over a decade, by the way, so I'm not including too many detailed things, because it's already out there. It's been out there. People have known about this. I've known about this for like 7 years. It's just the double standards between how a white person is treated in society versus a non-white person is trying to create a race war from the government. How else do you contextualize that? And then Piers Morgan has to be like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty unfair, yeah. It's heinous, absolutely heinous. But that's it, that's all. There's no accountability at all whatsoever. It's brought up every few years and then just forgotten about. And then the conversation is overshadowed by Islamophobia, just like how in the United States, if you try and talk about any issues with white people, it's overshadowed by racism and black people. This is a global Western phenomenon because they're trying to take over liberal Western democracies because they're too strong. Who's they? Who's they? You want to know who they is? Well, this video's gone on long enough. Maybe we can tackle that in another video. But until then, please stop letting inbred Pakistanis rape 14-year-old white girls, Britain. Please? Maybe you guys haven't done it because I haven't said please. Please stop doing it. I know you're a very polite people, so please stop doing that. Thank you. Have a good one.